Hi students, welcome to lesson number 40, Ethical Issues in Social Research. Let us start with the introduction. Research ethics is a codification of scientific morality in practice. Norms that regulate the research community, they are the integrity, accountability, impartiality, criticism, etc. The relationships to people who take part in the research respect human dignity, confidentiality, free and informed consent, etc. are the concern. Research in social sciences involves use of unethical practices. Issues of ethics arise primarily out of researchers' relations with A. Sponsors of research, B. Those who permit access to sources of data, and C. Research participants or respondents. One, to study ethical issues in social research. 2, to know the ethical dilemmas of research. 3, to examine ethical issues among respondents. Understanding of ethical issues in research. In recent decades, ethical considerations in research and academic communities have become more intense. This is in part a consequence of the legal changes related to human rights and data protection, but it is also the result of increased public concern for research and discovery restrictions. It is also concerned about responsible work in the workplace, especially in large organizations, expressing an interest in ethical standards at a higher level, focusing on consumer behavior and relationship with them and related investment decisions. Responsibility means thinking about the consequences of a person in relation to others and clear lines in the issue of accountability. No human activity can be separated from responsibility and accountability, whether public services, health services, medicine, social care or financial services, the commercial actions and the decisions. Ethical implications are monitored in all contexts and in all areas of activity. Therefore, there is a need to draw attention to accountability in research and to manage research processes. It relates to the discovery and sharing of information because the information is open to the public, and if it discovers an entity, then the highest ethical standards are not met. The evolving age of information and communication technologies, ethical concerns over information management have increased. This is relevant to the public and private sectors, as responsible behavior must be activated. Ethical discussions usually remain detached or marginalized from discussions of research projects. In fact, some researchers consider this aspect of research as an afterthought, yet the moral integrity of the researcher is a critically important aspect of ensuring that the research process and researchers' findings are trustworthy and valid. The term ethics derives from the Greek word ethos, meaning character. Engage with the ethical dimension of your research requires asking yourself several important questions. What moral principles guide your research? How do ethical issues influence your selection of a research problem? How do ethical issues affect how you conduct your research, the design of your study, your sampling procedure, and so on? What responsibility do you have towards your research subjects? For example, do you have their informed consent to participate in your project? What ethical issues or dilemmas might come into play in deciding what research findings you publish? Will your research directly benefit those who participated in the study? A consideration of ethics needs to be a critical part of the structure of the research process from the inception of your problem to the interpretation and publishing of the research findings. The three primary ethical principles cited in Belmont report are autonomy, beneficence and justice. 1. Autonomy refers to the right of an individual to determine what activities they will or will not participate in. Implicity. Full autonomy requires that the research participants are able to understand what they are being asked to do, make a reasoned judgment about the effect participation will have on them and make a choice to participate free from coercive influence. The cornerstone of protecting autonomy is the informed consent process, whereby an researcher or social scientist provides a potential research participant with full disclosure about the nature of the study, the risk benefits and alternatives, and extended opportunity to ask questions before deciding whether or not to participate. 2. Beneficiation refers to obligation on the part of the researcher or scientist to maximize benefits for the individual participant and or society, while minimizing risk of harm to the research participant. An honest enumeration of reasonably anticipated risk must be followed by a thorough risk or beneficent calculation. 3. Justice demands equitable selection of research participants, that is, avoiding research participant populations that may be unfairly coerced into participating, such as prisoners and institutionalized children. Social science research has long been concerned with ethical issues. Social science investigates complex issues which involve cultural, legal, economic and political phenomena. This complexity means that social science research must concern itself with moral integrity to ensure that research process and findings are trustworthy and valid. Research involving human subjects or participants is required to show respect for ethical issues by obtaining approval from the institution's Human Research Ethics Committee (HREC) prior to commencement. In developing countries where societies are often pluralistic, cultural background and security become important issues for social researchers in conducting fieldwork. This state of affairs can lead to the researchers finding it difficult to get letters of permission from the local authorities and may lead to delay. Ethical issues are becoming a crucial element in social research. It is compulsory for a social researcher conducting research involving humans to apply for ethical clearance. The ethical principles set out in the national statement state that all research involving human subject should be conducted in accordance with the people must be respected, benefits must be maximized and harms minimized. Harm shall not be done and subjects in studies must be treated equally. Clearly, ethical behavior in social science research should be required of all researchers, including interest in conducting research. The process of gathering information from the respondents requires informed consent, which means that prospective research participants must be fully informed about the procedures and risk involved in research and must give their consent to participate. Furthermore, ethical standards also require that researchers not put participants in potentially harmful situations. Harm can be either physical or psychological and may refer to harm caused by actual conduct of research, such as mental distress or harm arising from the publication of research outcomes. Almost all research guarantees the participants' confidentiality. This means they are assured identifying information will not be made available to anyone who is not directly involved in the study. The effective administration of these ethical rules means that there needs to be a procedure which ensures researchers will consider all relevant ethical issues, including guaranteeing respondents' privacy when formulating research plan. To address such needs, most institutions and organizations have established one or more human research ethics committees, a panel that reviews research proposals with respect to ethical implications and decides whether additional actions need to be taken to ensure the safety and rights of participants. The ethics committee at a number of universities has seen its task as including helping to protect both the organization and the researcher against potential litigation with respect to failure to address important ethical considerations on behalf of participants. The ethics committee consists of members from several different disciplinary backgrounds and is formally independent of university and government influence. Ethics committee members should be autonomous and must have no possible conflict of interest concerning the proposals they are judging. To ensure probity, the committee is regularly monitored and is accountable for its decision. Debate of ethical issues in social research. Several difficult issues have arisen in the application of ethical principles to social research. The first issue is associated with covert research. It is still questionable whether or not it is ethical for social science research scholars to covert research. Covert research is appropriate where it is necessary to achieve a better understanding of certain social phenomena. An example of this kind of research is the investigation of the social life of drug dealers and drug users. That covert research may have a negative impact for the researchers. He believes that as long as respondents trust the researcher, there is no need to conduct covert research. The covert research is likely to invade the privacy of the respondent to an unacceptable degree, and he argues that using covert research makes social science research no different from journalism. A second issue relates to the role of researcher as participant observer. The main concern here is that the researcher should be neutral in order to maintain their aim of objectivity in their research project. In research experience where the researcher also acts as a participant, he or she must normally develop and maintain close relationship with other community members. Some ethnographers have argued that a closer relationship between the researchers and participants of this kind can lead to conflict and deception. Researchers may find it difficult to make objective judgments in their research if they are personally connected with their respondents. A third issue concerns the nature of ethical regulation. With universities setting up ethics committee to review research proposals through a process of ethical review, and with academics under pressure to obtain for research grants, researchers have raised concerns that increased ethical review is circumscribing their ability to make their own decisions about ethical issues relating to their specific projects. Ethical regulation has produced a formulaic approach to research ethics in which researchers may feel constrained to tick the right boxes rather than think through ethical principles themselves. There is also a problem that basic ethical principles may lead to different and conflicting prescriptions. The term ethics creep is to characterize the change in social science research that has taken place in the name of ethics. 4. A further issue relates to vulnerable groups. In most ethical clearance processes, the social science research category vulnerable group refers to children and young people, people with mental health problems, and people with learning disabilities. In considering applications for ethics clearance, ethics committees also ask for special consideration to be given to vulnerable groups because they have difficulties in providing initial and continued information concerned to conduct research. This concern has led to an insistence on more complicated procedures to protect the interest of such groups. Researchers, however, have argued strongly against defining such groups as vulnerable and incompetent on the grounds that it makes researchers more likely to exclude from the research and thus to deprive them of the benefits of research. These researchers insist that it is unethical to exclude people from research on this basis. Researchers have argued, particularly in the area of child research, that interpreting groups as vulnerable has had a negative impact on the focus of research and the ways in which it is conducted. It has been argued that onus is on researchers to find ways of obtaining consent from individuals that is meaningful to them, regardless of their abilities. The final issue relates to informed consent. Increased bureaucratization of social science research resulting in from the broad changes taking place in research governance and regulation means that social researchers increasingly have their research projects assessed by ethics committees. One of the results of this increased bureaucratization has been the expectation that researchers will prove that they have obtained informed consent by providing forms signed by research participants. The main reason that ethics committee insists on informed consent are: 1. To ensure that participants understand what participation will involve and that they know their rights in relation to participation and issues of confidentiality and anonymity. 2. To protect researchers from later accusations by study participants. Social researchers argue that the use of informed consent is not appropriate in all types of research. For instance, in research involving public figure. Components of ethically valid informed consent for research. For an informed consent to be ethically valid, the components must be present. 1. Disclosure. The informed consent document must make clear that the social research is a study and not clinical therapy. The potential participant must be informed as fully as possible of the nature and purpose of the social research, the procedures to be used, the expected benefits to the participant and or society, the potential of reasonable foreseeable risk, stresses and discomforts. 2. Vocational training. Research and realities, alternatives to participating in the social research. There should also be a statement that describes procedures in place to ensure the confidentiality of data and anonymity of the research participant. The document should make it clear whom to contact with questions about the research study, research participants' rights and in case of any type of violation. 3. Understanding. The social research participant must understand what has to be explained and must be given the opportunity to ask questions and have them answered by someone fully conversant in the research study particulars. The informed consent document must be written in lay language, avoiding any technical jargon. The potential participant must be already to read and or to write, understand the language in which the consent form is written. The consent forms for multinational research must be translated into respective language for each participating country and back translated to verify accuracy. 4. Voluntariness. The social research participants concerned to participate in the social research must be voluntary, free of any coercion or inflated promise of benefits from participation. Care should be taken that the concerned form is administered by someone who does not hold authority over the research participant. 5. The competence. Social research participant must be competent to give consent. If the research participant is not competent due to the mental status, disease or emergency, a designated surrogate may provide consent if it is in the research participant's best interest to participate. 6. Consent. The potential human subject must authorize his or her participation in the social research study, preferably in writing. If there is no need to collect personally identifiable information and a signature on the consent form would be the only thing linking the participant to the social research study. An oral or implicit consent may be more appropriate. Children who cannot read or write should still signal their willingness to participate by an alternative act, example, nodding their head. Consent by minors is referred to as assent. As a general rule, deception is not acceptable when doing research with humans. Using deception jeopardizes the integrity of the informed consent process and could harm participants as well as eroding trust between the public and researchers or scientists. The ethical committees must carefully review any proposal that suggests using deception or misrepresentation. They will require an in-depth justification of why deception is necessary for the study and the steps that will be taken to safeguard participants, including a plan to debrief subjects at the end of the social research. A form of deception of research participants can occur if the terms of the informed consent are violated by the researcher or the scientist. The basic principles of ethical standards. In most cases, ethical standards involve 9 principles. 1. Honesty and integrity. The researcher or the scientist must present his or her research in good faith, and this relates to methods, data, results and information on the publication of the research. The researcher or the scientist cannot use any data that constitutes the prerequisite to doubt the objectivity of the research results, which misleads the society. 2. Objectivity. The researcher or the scientist must avoid bias in any aspect of the study, including design, data analysis, interpretation and review or evaluation of the report publication. 3. Carefulness. The researcher or the scientist must take care to avoid mistakes due to negligence. The researcher or the scientist must evaluate his or her research carefully and critically, ensuring that the results findings are reliable. It is important to keep track of all the entries in the study. If the researcher or the scientist are asked to review, she must devote his time to the work to be done efficiently and completely. 4. Openness. The researcher or the scientist must always be prepared to share his or her data and results and the new instruments which have been formed when publishing the results of his or her research, as this helps to develop knowledge and science. The researcher or the scientist must be open to critics and new ideas. 5. Respect for intellectual property. The researcher scientist must not plagiarize or copy other research or the scientist works. Have a clear permit before using other research or scientist tool or methods, unpublished data or the results or the findings. The neglect of these aspects is plagiarism. The researcher or the scientist must respect copyrights and the patents and other forms of intellectual property and acknowledge their contribution to their research. 6. The confidentiality. The researcher or the scientist must respect anything that is presented in a confidential. The researcher or the scientist must follow the guidelines for communicating the sensitive information, that is, the information provided by the research participants in the study. 7. Responsible publication. The researcher or the scientist must publish for the development of the science and knowledge, but not just for the care of his or her career. This means that the researcher or the scientist should not publish anything that is new or repeats the work of another researcher scientist. 8. The legality. The researcher or the scientist must always be aware and deliberately apply the rules or the principles and the guidelines that affect the ongoing research, and to be sure that all the research activities are in line with these ethical requirements. 9. The human protection. If study involves humans, the researcher or the scientist must ensure that the research study reduces any potential damage to the research participants to the minimum and increases the scientific benefit of the participants in the study and other people or the society. This means that the researcher or the scientist cannot force research participants to complete the test solely because they are needed for the purposes of the individual research. The researcher or the scientist must always respect human rights, including the right to privacy and autonomy. The researcher or the scientist must take into account the vulnerable groups of children, older people and old people. Ethics are the self-regulatory guidelines for making decisions and defining professions. By establishing ethical codes, professional organizations maintain the integrity of the profession. It is defined that the expected conduct of members and to protect the welfare of the subjects and the clients. Moreover, ethical codes give professionals directions when confronting ethical dilemmas or confusing situations. A case in point is a scientist's decision whether to intentionally deceive subjects or inform them about the true risk or goals of a controversial but much needed experiment. Many organizations such as the sociological associations establish ethical principles and guidelines. The vast majority of today's social scientists abide by their respective organizations' ethical principles. The 5 ethical considerations in sociological research. The Sociological Association's Code of Ethics sets forth the principles and ethical standards that underlie sociologists' professional responsibilities and conduct. These principles and standards should be used as guidelines when examining everyday professional activities. They constitute the normative statements for sociologists and provide guidance on issues that sociologists may encounter in their professional work. The Sociological Association's Code of Ethics contain 5 general principles and explanations. The professional competence. Sociologists strive to maintain the highest level of competence in their work. They recognize the limitations of their expertise and they undertake only those tasks for which they are qualified by education, training or experience. They recognize the need for ongoing education in order to remain professionally competent, and they utilize the appropriate scientific, professional, technical and administrative resources needed to ensure competence in their professional activities. They consult with other professionals when necessary for the benefit of their students or the research participants and the clients. Integrity. Sociologists are honest, fair and respectful of others in their professional activities in research, teaching, practice and service. Sociologists do not knowingly act in ways that jeopardize either their own or others' professional welfare. Sociologists conduct their affairs in ways that inspire trust and confidence. They do not knowingly make statements that are false, misleading or deceptive. The professional and scientific responsibility. Sociologists adhere to the highest scientific and professional standards and accept responsibility for their work. Sociologists understand that they form a community and show respect for sociologists even when they disagree on theoretical, methodological or personal approaches to professional activities. Sociologists value the public trust in sociology and are concerned about their ethical behavior and that of other sociologists that might compromise that trust. While endeavoring always to be collegial, sociologists must never let the desire to be collegial outweigh their shared responsibility for ethical behaviors. When appropriate, they consult with colleagues in order to prevent and avoid unethical conduct. Respect for people's rights, dignity and diversity. Sociologists respect the rights, dignity and worth of all people. They strive to eliminate bias in their professional activities and they do not tolerate any forms of discrimination based on age, gender, race, ethnicity, national origin, religion, sexual orientation, disability, health conditions or the marital, domestic or parental status. They are sensitive to cultural, individual and role differences in serving, teaching and studying groups of people with distinctive characteristics. In all of their work related activities, sociologists acknowledge the rights of others to hold values and opinions that differ from their own. The social responsibility. Sociologists are aware of their professional and scientific responsibility to the communities and societies in which they live and work. They apply and make their public knowledge in order to contribute the public good. When undertaking research, they strive to advance the science of sociology and to serve the public. Now, let us sum up. Ethics are self-regulatory guidelines for making decisions and defining the professions. By establishing ethical codes, professional organizations maintain the integrity of the profession and define the expected conduct of members and protect the welfare of the subjects and the clients. Moreover, ethical codes give professionals direction when confronting ethical dilemmas or confusing situations. The ethical considerations in research and academic communities have become more intense. This is in part a consequence of the legal changes related to human rights and data protection, but it is also the result of increased public concern for research and discovery restrictions. Thank you.